My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
As part of our celebration of the holiday season and a desire to kind of take a look back at our more than 110 episodes of Mind Over Murder, we've gone back and selected a few episodes we thought were worth a second listen. Enjoy this bonus episode of Mind Over Murder in addition to all of our new episodes, which we continue to record. This week, we are starting a discussion of the Gina Renee Hall case. Kristin spent a great deal of time researching this, so tell us about Gina Renee Hall.
Gina Renee Hall was a 18-year-old freshman at Radford University in 1980, and she was, by all accounts, the girl next door. She was beautiful. She was beloved by most everyone in the community. In fact, she was voted most popular in her graduating class at Coburn High School. She was also an athlete. She played tennis. She played golf. She competed in gymnastics. She taught gymnastics and tap dance to local kids after school. She was active in the United Methodist Church with her family. Pretty much the epitome of girl next door, I would say.
I think so too. And also it's worth noting that 40 years ago in 1980, women's athletics was nowhere near the powerhouse that it is today. So for this young woman, Gina, to be involved in so many different sports is really, really impressive. I mean, I think she was probably playing every woman's sport that was available to her in high school.
And she was, excelling on a considerable level. She went to states for tennis. And, like you said, in 1980, that was certainly no small feat. I do want to go ahead and say that we are getting all of this information from one source, which we cannot recommend highly enough for all of our listeners. And that is the book Under the Trestle by Ron Peterson Jr. And this is a 2018 book about Gina Renee Hall's murder and the trial of her assailant, Stephen Madison Epperly. It's an excellent book. I've really enjoyed it. You've enjoyed it too, correct, Bill?
I have. It's a wonderful book, and Ron's been incredibly helpful, I know, to you and your research. They're going to be making a documentary television series out of the book. It's outstanding. It's a great read. We're going to be looking forward to talking to Ron Peterson in the near future.
So Gina's actually described in the book as one of the most sincere and thoughtful people that most people had ever met. So this is a woman who is really the light of many people's lives and very, very much the girl next door. So Gina lived in Radford, Virginia. And for those of you that need this placed a little bit in geography for you, Radford is in the region of Virginia called the New River Valley. And it is very near a town that we have been focused on quite a lot in our last couple of podcast episodes, and that is the town of Blacksburg, home to Virginia Tech.
And Radford, Virginia is another one of these places, and this made me smile. Radford, Virginia is another college town. It's a small town, about 11,000 permanent residents, and then nearly 9,000 graduate level and undergrads. So the population effectively doubles. Boy, does that sound familiar, in Radford when school is in session.
Very familiar at this point. Virginia Tech students and Radford students will often take classes at each other's campuses. Stephen Epperly was a student at Virginia Tech, but he also took classes at Radford. So this is not uncommon for students of either university to be seen on each other's campus.
It's interesting reading about the history of Radford University, which started out as a women's college and then became part of Virginia Tech and then broke off from Virginia Tech sometime in the 1960s.
It did declare itself a university in 1979, and for a while it was just a women's college, but it did go co-ed in 1972.
And still had a very large population, far more women than men attending the school, partly because of that longstanding tradition as a women's college.
So Gina was a Radford freshman, and she was last seen on the night of June 28th, 1980, when she went with a group of her girlfriends to the lounge at the Blacksburg Marriott. And that was the place to be if you wanted to go dancing.
And this is at the tail end of the disco era. And we're both old enough to remember disco. I think you are.
I am not old enough to remember disco, sir. Bite your tongue.
Oh, okay. I was hoping.
No, for the record, Bill is old enough to remember the disco era.
Yes, I was very young, but I was there.
And I was not born until a full year after this case.
Okay. All right. I take it back. You're not old enough. I'm more of a rock and roll guy, but I will say that I have been to a disco a few times. And hopefully there are no pictures to prove that.
Oh, on the contrary, I hope that there are pictures. And I hope if some of our listeners have them, they will send them.
Let's just leave that alone.
Well, in order to go out dancing, Gina put on a specific outfit, which is will come into play a little bit later. So I'm going to go ahead and describe it for you. And this is, again, please remember the 1980s.
It's right at the dawn of the decade.
Yes. So to go out dancing, Gina was wearing a purple danskin bodysuit, plunging V in the back. She had on white Bobby Brooks pants, the kind that are high-waisted, white Wrangler denim jacket, and I may or may not have had one of those at one point. Don't judge me. And she had on purple velvet shoes. And to complete her ensemble, she had on her favorite ankle bracelet, which was yellow gold, and it was 2 interlocking hearts.
Boy, it was 1980. By the way,
yes, it was.
I'd like it noted that your admission of the white Wrangler denim jacket is significant and will be noted.
I said I may or may not have had one. You really cannot prove which it is.
Again, photos would be helpful. Oh, it would be a great look, I have to say.
And I think it's actually a look that's coming back. So we should make a note about something here with regards to Gina's look. And it is that she did have a tendency to dress conservatively. That is because she had had a terrible childhood accident when her pajamas caught fire after brushing against a gas burner in her home. So she had burn scars over 90% of the right side of her body.
Yeah, it's a terrible
And as a result, it's a horrible, horrible accident. And she was still very beautiful. You could take a look at pictures of Gina, and she is an absolute stunner. But she was very, I think as a lot of people would be, she was very self-conscious. And so she kept as much of her body covered as possible at all times, which is why she's wearing a bodysuit in June, the end of June even. And take it from someone who went to school in the mountains, it is hot and humid at the tail end of June. It is not necessarily the night to be wearing a bodysuit and a jacket. That was her choice for fashion.
It's funny. She had actually been through a lot. This accident happened back when she was 2 years old. And so think about how little you were when you were 2. And she had to grow up. And so she had a lot of painful operations over her entire childhood all the way up into her late teens, where they had to do surgery, and it just sounds horrible. And apparently she was positive and stoic about it and got through it. But this is something that had obviously, left lots of different types of scars on her, both internally and externally.
So Gina went out for her night of dancing, and she was last seen with Stephen Epperly, who is a former Virginia Tech football player who was working at the time as a groundskeeper at Radford.
Now, Epperly's 10 years older than she is. He's 28 years old. He's out with his friends for the night, 4 other former football players at a place that was known as a place to meet women. And this apparently was a big thing with him.
Yeah, he, on the outside, he was the kind of guy who really seemed to be a ladies' man. He had everything going for him. He was charming, good looking. He radiated confidence. Some would call it arrogance. But this is a guy who was very used to getting what he wanted from women whenever he wanted it. And if he didn't get it, he did have a tendency to take it.
He was known by his teammates for having a violent temper, and he was the guy who was described as the guy that would fly off the handle. One teammate even said he had a screw loose, and another classmate said he turned into a raging animal when he was confronted. And He would pick fights with other men. He was well and widely known for this. And then also, as you're saying, Kristin, being very sexually aggressive with women.
There's some incidences that are described in the book that just made my blood run cold when they're talking about his temper and the fact that he would just let loose and fly off the handle. There was one road rage incident in particular that just, he got out of a car and was angry at someone and started pounding on their window in the middle of traffic. And that is the sort of thing that just makes me go, wow, this is not a person you want to be around.
No. And it's funny, he'd been hired as a bouncer at several nightclubs, and he actually developed a reputation for being too violent. I mean, the bouncer's job is to break up fights and keep people calm, check IDs and that sort of thing. And it's supposed to be a calming influence, not escalating. And he was known for making things worse and these incredible acts of violence. There's another story that we read that he was actually working at the college and was chasing a guy through the cafeteria, and he clearly wanted to beat this guy up. Another teammate stepped in and put him in a bear hug and got him calmed down and let the other student escape. He said he was talking to Epperly saying, if you don't calm down, you're going to get in a fight and then you're going to get kicked off the team, which was obviously very important. Epperly had been pursuing a college football career for years with limited success. His teammate had to remind him, you don't want to get in a fight with this guy in the cafeteria, no matter what the kid did. Just let it go and stay on the team. Epperly would just have these flashes of anger and just completely lose it. And this would be directed at both women and men.
The reason that we are spending so much time on this is because we really want to establish here the fact that, for all intents and purposes, has a history of this sort of behavior, both toward men and toward women. And we will get into sort of the other issues that he had with women, the rape charges and so on and so forth a little bit later. A
little bit more about his background. He came from a family that was big outdoorsmen. They were very into hunting, sports, and religion. Those were their three big interests. He was considered a highly aggressive football player. Here we go again. Under coach Frank Beamer, was a very well-known NCAA coach who also coached at Virginia Tech. And he was a track star as well. He loved to hang out with his friends and was considered fiercely loyal to his friends and teammates. He was kind of a C student who sort of put enough effort in. He was considered highly intelligent, but he put enough effort in just to keep his grades at a C level so that he could continue to play sports. And his classmates also described him as hyper and prone to misbehavior as far back as high school.
And, this was a guy who did want to play college football, but he did not, he wasn't distinguished enough as an athlete or as a scholar to get into the big programs. So ultimately he ended up going to, it's referred to as JUCO or junior college in the book. And so he went to Ferrum College, took his time trying to play, tried to, build up his skill, his prowess, and tried to bulk up too, because he was not, at the end of high school, he was not a big guy, but he ultimately, did not distinguish himself at Ferrum. So he didn't return to Ferrum and actually had to move back home with his parents to take a class or two at Radford University while he tried to sort out, well, okay, I can't play football there. Now what am I going to do?
And this is a guy that took 7 years to get his college degree with all of these stops and starts at Ferrum, then Virginia Tech, then Radford, and he was on the slow track in terms of actually getting a degree. And so he finally graduated. It took him 7 years. And then he proceeded to work through a series of jobs, again, not particularly distinguishing himself. He was a failed real estate agent. He was an occasional substitute teacher and a delivery driver, and he just sort of plugging away at these different jobs. And then he finally landed a job at Radford as a grounds maintenance worker. At this point, he's 28 years old and he's back living with his parents in June 1980.
Yeah, not a place that you would want to see yourself necessarily at a point in your life when you're trying to move forward, get up, get out, and get your life started. So on the night of June 28th, Gina Hall borrowed her sister Delena's 1975 Chevy Monte Carlo she decided to make that 15-minute drive into Blacksburg to go to the lounge at the Blacksburg Marriott. And she arrived there around 11:30. And that is roughly around the same time that Stephen Epperly also arrived with his group of friends. At that point, once they were inside the club and Gina was out on the dance floor, and she was a incredibly skilled, very talented dancer. She'd been formally trained in a number of types of dance. So she would have distinguished herself on the dance floor. Epperly noticed her, both because of her skill as a dancer and because she was quite beautiful. He asked her to dance. And they went out on the dance floor for 4, maybe 5 songs together, and then went back to their respective group of friends. Eventually, they sort of met again, continued to socialize, and the evening continued until around 12:30, when Stephen Epperly walked to his friend Bill King, who he had arrived with earlier, and asked if he could borrow the keys to the lake house, which Bill King was minding for his friends, Ron and Betty Davis, while they were on vacation. When Epperly said, "Hey, can I have the keys to the house? I'd like to take this lady there to hang out," or whatever one does at a lake house, King said, "Yeah, sure." And he handed over the keys to the house.
I think at this point, Gina may have been very naive about what was going to transpire. Her sister says that she would have never gone knowingly to an isolated place like the lake house with a man by herself. I think that it's quite possible that Gina was deceived about what was going to happen. In other words, I think she was under the impression that a group of people might have been heading there in several cars to, continue the evening to party or what have you. I think Gina, based on what we've read and heard in articles and in the book, I don't think she dated a lot because she was self-conscious about her appearance. And I don't think she realized the potential downside to going to this isolated, if beautiful, lake with this man that she didn't know very well. I think it's probably worth noting, we've certainly seen a pattern, Kristin, you and I, of young women, especially college freshmen, who've gotten themselves into compromising situations. We are not even remotely victim blaming. We're just saying that I think all of us need to be more aware of the potential pitfalls of situations like this, particularly for young women and men. I'm talking about women at this moment who are in a college environment, and there are these older men who will take advantage of the naivete of young women. I mean, this is a classic. Gina is this very accomplished, very bright young lady from a really small town who is now finding herself in this milieu of much more sophisticated and even predatory behavior.
And it is just so unfortunate for her that she ended up ultimately encountering one of the worst types of predator out there, which is a man who wants what he wants and will take what he wants, however he feels that he can get it. Epperly asked Gina if she could drive to the lake house. He had arrived with friends and he did not have a car. So he said, "Hey, can you drive to the lake house?" And with some hesitation, she said, "Okay, sure." They took the Monte Carlo and headed to the lake house. And the lake house is on a place called Claytor Lake, which is a 4,000-acre freshwater lake that's about 3 miles from Radford. Absolutely beautiful. And there are lake houses all around it. So this is not a remote cabin in the woods by any stretch of the imagination. It's a beautiful home. There are neighbors nearby. There's a dock going down to the lake. So she's not going out to the middle of nowhere with a strange guy. I think exactly what you said, Bill, is probably right. She probably figured there's going to be a group of us eventually, and they were just maybe headed over there first. She did drive Epperly over to the lake house, but she may have had some second thoughts. At least this is what it seems like to me, because around 1 a.m., Gina Hall got a phone call from her sister. And she said Gina sounded a little nervous, uneasy, actually is how she termed it. Gina asked, "Where are you?" And she said, "Well, I'm out at the lake. I'm with a man named Steve." Gina basically said, "Look, hurry home whenever you can." She did say that the line went very abruptly dead on Gina's end. And that was the last phone call that she received from her sister. And it was the last time that she ever spoke to her sister.
Just a reminder for our younger listeners, again, this is a pre-cell phone environment. Your only choice is a landline. And so if you want to call to check in with your sister at 1 o'clock in the morning, you're going to do it from the landline at the lake house. And that's the only option you've got.
Around 3:45 or 4 a.m., Steve Epperly's friend and the guy who's minding the lake house arrived with his date, Robin Robinson. They arrived thinking that they would go for a late night swim. And Gina's car was in the driveway. But when they went into the lake house, they did not see Gina, nor did they actually see Epperly. Bill and Steve Epperly had a brief conversation, but they had it in the stairwell. Bill is on the living room in the ground floor. Epperly is at the foot of the spiral staircase downstairs, and they're kind of yelling up and down to each other, but neither saw each other during the course of the conversation. That is important. We're going to come back to why that is in just a second. So the conversation essentially was Bill and Robin said they were going to go swimming, and they asked Gina and Epperly if they would like to come along with them. And Epperly said, no, Gina's got to get back home. Bill and Robin went down to the dock. Well, a couple of minutes later, once they're down at the dock, splashing around, getting in the lake, they hear Epperly call down to them, leaving. And even though both of them saw him silhouetted in the back porch light, neither of them saw Gina and neither of them heard Gina.
I think this is key because this conversation is taking place between these kind of two couples, if you will, and yet Gina's never seen, nor is she heard.
Bill and Robin have their swim. They come back inside to the lake house a little bit later. And Bill King noted that he recalled stepping in a wet patch on the carpet. And he assumed that wet patch was, I think, probably what most people would assume from a beach house or a lake house, which is, well, it's water. There was maybe a towel here or bathing suit. So he didn't examine it, didn't really think about it too terribly much, just noted it and then went upstairs to continue his date with Robin.
And the spot, he noted, was still there the next day. And this, of course, becomes a little significant a bit further into the story. Around
5:30, Gina's car, it's Delano's car, but sort of for ease of simplicity, I'm going to call it Gina's car, was noted by a deputy who was on patrol underneath a railroad trestle on Hazel Hollow Road. And that railroad trestle crosses the New River, and that's about 3 miles from Claytor Lake. The deputy noted it, but it hadn't been reported as stolen. There was nothing suspicious about it, so he just made a note, hey, there's a car there. Even though it was there 12 hours later, noted again by the same deputy, he didn't do much more than just make note of the fact that, no, still a car there.
Not beating anybody up here, but this is an unfortunate missed opportunity, particularly when the car was there 12 hours later, probably at the other end of a long day.
I'm sure that the person who noted it was probably kicking himself a little bit later when he realized the significance of a car being there first thing in the morning and still being there 12 hours later.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. Many of you know that Othram is leading the way in DNA testing, helping law enforcement solve missing persons, homicides, and sexual assault cases across the United States and Canada using forensic-grade DNA tests.
You can help this important cause by contributing funds and your DNA profile to Othram's free site, DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps.
Now DNA Solves has added another new feature, DNA Solves Connect, which will allow you to upload your DNA profile to help law enforcement, even if you've never used one of the commercial genealogy sites.
If you're looking for a missing family member or have lost touch with someone, DNA Solves Connect is an incredible option at only $14.95.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com.
Join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
So by 6:30 on that Sunday morning, Gina Hall woke up, realized her sister had not come home. She says that she knew immediately something was wrong because it was not like Gina to not come home. So rather than worry her father by calling him, she just got together a group of friends and said, hey, we need to go look for Gina. Something's wrong. She hasn't come home. And we all know that she's not the kind of person who wouldn't come home.
But by the next day, now they were really starting to get nervous, and now we're into Monday. And at this point, her father, John Hall, had arrived in town to help look for his daughter, and they did go to the police. This I found kind of odd. The Radford police, according to the book, said they couldn't file a missing persons report for anyone missing under 24 hours. At this point, 24 hours had to have elapsed. She was last seen on Saturday night. She called and said she was nervous, uncomfortable, and was out at this lake house with a man named Steve. So at what point are we running the clock here? Because the following morning, she's not there. The day after that, I mean, at some point, this reluctance back then of the police to acknowledge that someone who is a highly responsible young woman has not come home and that there may be a problem here. This one always makes me scratch my head. And we've heard about this numerous times where, in this case, her sister and roommate are looking for Gina, and they seem to have a difficult time convincing law enforcement to put out a missing persons report on this important individual who is normally highly responsible.
And they did actually go to a local radio station and ask, hey, can you guys put out a quick broadcast saying that we're looking for Gina Hall, and if anyone has any information, can they please call? And the radio station did let them do that, which I thought was pretty cool. But in terms of an official, notification that this very responsible human being has, now been missing for quite a while and we're worried, there definitely was not that.
So now we're into Monday.
We're into Monday. Around noon on Monday, there's still groups of people out looking for Gina. And finally, they noticed the car that's under the railroad trestle and called the police. And at that point, the police were like, oh, right. That's that car that someone said had been there for over 12 hours. Maybe we need to go check that out. The police noted that the trunk to the car was open and that there were areas of dried blood and hair in the trunk. That squicks me out. The ignition key to the car was found on the ground near the trunk, and there was also a screwdriver there.
Now, at this point, an investigator who becomes pivotal to the investigation, a trooper named Austin Hall, no relation to Gina, is called in to take a look, and he calls the forensic analysis unit. He begins to treat the car as if it was a crime scene. This proves to be pivotal, and you have to give Trooper Hall a lot of credit. Now, again, a reminder, DNA is not a thing in 1980. DNA didn't even come out of the lab for forensic work until the late 1980s. So this is before DNA is a factor. They did do other types of forensic analysis, which we'll get into, but it is not a situation where DNA would have been discussed or where a crime scene like the interior of the car would have been secured in the way that a crime scene would be secured now in 2020. It was a very, very different era.
So now at this point, it's almost like we have two narratives running against each other. We have what is going on with Stephen Epperly and what is going on with Gina Hall in the search for Gina. We're going to switch to Epperly here for just a couple of minutes and talk about some what I call very strange and suspicious behavior on his part. Bill King, who, as we know, was at the lake house and had a conversation with Stephen but had not seen Gina, heard a radio bulletin about the disappearance of Gina Hall. And he very quickly recognized that's the person Stephen was with on Saturday night.
Bill had been at the disco, so he had seen them dancing together. He didn't see her at the lake house, but he did see her at the nightclub.
Realizing pretty quickly he needs to talk to his friend, went downtown to the hangout where Epperly could quite often be found, and that was called the Radford Barbell Club. So just sort of a gym, place where guys can go to lift weights. Nothing fancy. We're not talking like Planet Fitness or anything like that, but just a place where guys could go to lift. And found Epperly and said, you need to go to the police and you need to tell them where you saw her and when, because otherwise you're going to be a suspect. So how about you make that call? To which Epperly's very strange response was, who all knows I was with her? It's kind of damning in my book, first of all. And it was then followed by, will you go back there to the gym and tell them not to say anything? Just kind of talk it down, not broadcast it.
I'm shaking my head because already in this very early going, Gina's still a missing person. Epperly's responses are so bizarre. He is right from the get-go behaving like he's guilty of something.
Bill King, who and I was talking to Ron Peterson about this the other day, and I said, I have got to hand it to Bill King for being a really conscientious person in all of this, for immediately coming forward and saying what he knows and being willing to help with the investigation. A lot of people, I think, might have balked at the idea that they might end up involved in something like this, but Bill King immediately came forward and called the police and said, look, I know that girl. I saw her. She was at the nightclub with my friend Steve. So he called and gave the information he knew. And Steve Epperly actually followed up with his own phone call at 3, and he was asked to come downtown for an interview.
My guess is Epperly was feeling kind of boxed in by Bill King's doing the right thing.
I imagine that's probably about right, yeah. So he went downtown for an interview. Trooper Hall asked Epperly to please go on a ride along with him to the lake house and walk him through the events of that evening. And he did. Epperly never put up a fight about any of this. He was never, hesitant or anything else. He just said, yeah, whatever you want. But apparently he was not satisfied with the answers that he got from Stephen Epperly with regard to a lot of what had happened that evening. So ultimately, by the time the interview and the ride along was over, he did ask Stephen Epperly to return the next day to take a polygraph. Epperly did readily agree to do that.
Interesting, to say the least.
So now we come to another interesting and I think very damning piece of evidence here against Stephen Epperly. And Bill and I were talking about this earlier and just shaking our head because this is beyond the pale. After completing this interview with Trooper Austin Hall, Steve Epperly decided to take a ride to Blacksburg with his close friend Tom Hardy. And thinking that he might eventually need an attorney, he went to Hardy's business partner, Bill Cranwell, and he said, hey, can your brother Richard be my attorney? And Bill apparently wanted no part of this whatsoever. So he flat out said, no, he won't. Absolutely not. And Epperly then had one other request. And he said, when you talk to your brother, ask if there's anything they can do to me if they don't find the body. And he asked the question twice.
It's interesting to note here, too, that Tom Hardy has a pretty extensive criminal background himself and has been rumored to have been involved in as many as 4 different murders where he may have been involved in helping to dispose of the remains of some of those murder victims. So it's an interesting choice that he's visiting with Tom Hardy and then talks to Bill Cranwell. And then in his request of Cranwell to his brother Richard, the attorney, he's asking these very odd questions. Epperly is asking these very odd questions about when you talk to your brother, ask if there's anything they can do to me if they don't find the body. It's very, very striking.
Oh my God. I didn't have words when I reached that point in the book. I had to take a minute and just put the book down and go, oh my God, are you kidding me? Proof of guilt. Just right there, yeah. Proof of guilt.
He's certainly behaving like a guilty man.
He definitely is. In the very interesting series of coincidences that can sometimes come with people who live in small towns and in even smaller geographic areas, we have one very interesting coincidence here as regards Bill Cranwell. And that is that Bill Cranwell happened to be the former Virginia Tech roommate and Virginia Tech football team member of Gina Renee Hall's father, John Hall. They were close friends, teammates, and as soon as Cranwell heard that Epperly had made this request in regards to being a suspect in Gina Renee Hall's disappearance, Cranwell immediately called the Radford PD and he reported the conversation and that very strange, very damning question to Radford PD.
So we do have some people who are doing the right thing right from the get-go, whether it's Bill King or Bill Cranwell. They seem to recognize that Epperly's behavior is inappropriate from the word go, and they want no part of it. And so they are reaching out to law enforcement and letting the investigators know what's going on, kind of, I think, distancing themselves from Epperly and certainly from Epperly's highly suspicious behavior.
So the next day, Epperly has a follow-up interview. He also has a polygraph test. At this point, there are 2 things that make the alarm bells go off in the minds of the Radford PD, even more than they already have about Steve Epperly. And that is the fact that there were 2 rape charges against him that were made in Blacksburg. He was cleared of all charges in these 2 very violent and vicious rapes. Unjustly, I might add. I could probably get quite upset. You're grinning at me because you can see where I'm building up a head of steam here.
Yes, we may be in different rooms, but we can see each other.
I could get a whole head of steam going here about the fact that Epperly got off on 2 very violent, vicious, awful rapes, and he somehow managed to talk his way out of it. There aren't enough curse words that I could say or would want to say on the air regarding those things. But the fact is, he was cleared of 2 violent, vicious, awful rapes. And once Blacksburg PD called Redford PD and said, hey, that guy that you guys are looking at in the Gina Renee Hall case, there's 2 things you need to know about him. That really set the alarm bells off when it came to Stephen Epperly.
We all know it's really difficult to prosecute successfully a rape case in 2020. This is 40 years ago. Women were often not believed. As bad as things still are today, it was much worse back then. A lot of rapes went unreported or unprosecuted because it was so difficult, and it's such a different era. I know it's only 40 years ago, but it seems like forever in terms of law enforcement and our ability to understand that these things need to be taken as seriously as they are. And as frustrating as it can be in 2020, it was much, much worse in 1980.
You know, a lot of time the questions were put to the women who had been raped. What were you wearing? What did you say? Did you lead him to believe, finish the sentence? And that it's infuriating, but that was often the burden of proof was placed on the woman to prove you were raped and prove that you didn't somehow ask for it. And that, unfortunately, because Epperly was the sort of person that he was, which was charming and confident, and he was able to really pull off this good guy persona that would make people think, oh, he couldn't have raped anybody. Who would do that? He's such a nice boy.
Yeah, and he's handsome and charming, and he's a jock. And he actually is from a pretty modest working class background, but he had played on a number of college teams, and I think he was able to get by on his charm and good looks in many different ways. And of course, as we talked about earlier in this episode, he is clearly extremely violent, and that violence is often directed at women. When he has decided that he's gone out on a date with a woman or he's gone home with a woman, he decides whether or not there's going to be sexual contact. If he sees something he likes, he's going to take it. And that pattern appears over and over again with this guy. It doesn't always cross the line into rape, but it definitely did at least twice in terms of these are situations where he was brought up on charges, but he did manage to escape any kind of prosecution.
And I think there was a certain amount of, oh crap, what have we let loose when investigators began reading up on those charges from Blacksburg. It became alarming very quickly. Oh my gosh, this guy is a predator. He's been wandering around here and we've somehow let him slip our grasp. At that point, 3 of the investigators, Trooper Austin Hall, Captain Gerald Williams, and Detective Jackie Root, went to Bill King one more time and asked if he would please allow them access to the lake house where they had been on the 28th. Bill King, again, showing his willingness to participate and help in any way that he could. He allowed them access and allowed them to investigate the inside of the lake house. And this is where we start to see evidence of Gina Hall's very likely fate. So inside the lake house, they found that large oval stain, the one that Bill King had said was wet, that he kept putting his foot in. That was about the size of a basketball. And it was on the carpet in the rec room, and it had been cleaned to the best of someone's ability out of that shag carpet. But it was still there. And really, that was the biggest stain in the room. But when there was a very close, thorough, hands and knees investigation, more than a dozen smaller blood stains were found in 4 different rooms in the house. And there had been obvious attempts to clean up all of that blood.
And I found myself in reading this part of the book just wishing and hoping this had been the DNA era. So many questions could have been answered. Obviously, the science wasn't out of the lab at this point.
So small amounts of blood in the form of tiny droplets were found on a number of items throughout these 4 rooms. Chair legs, a dustpan, a water pitcher, a pair of shoes, and probably most disturbingly of all to me, a mattock, which is, it's like a digging tool that's similar to a pickaxe.
That was my word of the day, by the way. I'd never heard of a mattock. M-A-T-T-O-C-K.
I hadn't either until I read this, and it does not sound like something you want to be hit with, and it sounds like that may have been, I don't know, maybe that's what happened. We don't actually know. The other piece of evidence that they found quite disturbing, and I found quite disturbing as well, was a golf shoe, and there was both blood and hair caked on the metal spikes of that golf shoe. There were blood smears found on the door handle of a utility room fridge. It was found on both the handle, the other side of the door near the inner seal, and when they took the door off of its hinges to investigate further, they found blood congealed at the bottom of the refrigerator door, like where it had pooled. But when Epperly attempted to clean the door, he had missed that little blood pool. And they also found hair and carpet fibers in that blood as well.
This is not looking good at all.
And really, the most damning piece of evidence out of all of it is the fact that Gina Hall's gold ankle bracelet, the one with the interconnected hearts, was found on the spiral staircase between the first and second floor.
And this is the same gold bracelet that she ran back inside to the apartment she shared with her sister to get because she didn't want to go out without wearing her favorite ankle bracelet.
So ultimately, all told, after this investigation of the lake house, more than 30 evidence samples were taken from the lake and were sent to the state crime lab in Roanoke, Virginia for testing. Not looking good.
No, and it gets worse for Epperly.
So the next day, Epperly reported back to police headquarters for a polygraph. After a reading on that polygraph from a polygraph technician, they told police that his results indicated deception, especially in response to the following questions. Did you harm Gina Hall? Did you kill Gina Hall? And do you know the current whereabouts of Gina Hall? And at that point, after getting that discussion about the polygraph test, Stephen Epperly officially became a suspect in the disappearance and murder of Gina Renee Hall.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mind Over Murder. You can listen to Mind Over Murder on any of your favorite podcast platforms. And a reminder that we're a new podcast and we very much appreciate your subscriptions and your kind comments and reviews.
Thank you so much for listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Sources used in this week's episode include
reporting from the Radford News Journal, the Roanoke Times, The Charlie Project, Under the Trestle by Ron Peterson Jr., WDBJ7, WFXR, WTOP, and WY Daily.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.